Welcome to Kaurna country. I would like to acknowledge the Kaurna people, my ancestors, who are the people of this land. I would like to acknowledge all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who live on this land or are from other parts of Australia. And I would like to welcome all those non-Aboriginal people who are here today. I especially like to thank those people who have travelled far and wide. Thank you for bringing your skills, your knowledge and your stories to share with us. Thank you for bringing your different languages. As Aboriginal people, there are many reasons why we believe in welcoming people to country. This is about respect. Respect for this land, respect for our ancestors, and respect for each other. I also wish to welcome you to country because to be welcome links us all from the very beginning. Spiritually, to be welcomed by the people of the land connects you to the land and to each other. We have come to this event from so many different places, different cultures and different countries. And now we are to be together for these 3 days. It's exciting. What is going to link us during our time together? Well, for these 3 days, we will all be spending time on Kaurna land. We all have come to listen to other people's stories and to listen to other people. We have come because we want to learn so that we can assist those back in our own communities. We all have come here to make connections. Over the last 20 years, as part of the Dulwich Centre team, we have visited many different Aboriginal communities. We only go where we are invited. And we are invited to many different places where people want to tell their stories in ways that make them stronger. Across the land, our people speak in different languages. Some of us live in the cities, others in the bush. Some are traditional and some are not. But whatever difference we are from each other, we always find ways to make links and to make connections. What is it that links us? Sometimes shared sorrow, shared injustice is the connection. Other times it is our wish to share skills, passion and knowledge. There are many different ways that we link storylines. I also want to welcome you to this university. I left school at 13, and when I was a child you had to be 6 years old in order to start school. I was a very tall and skinny 6-year-old, and I didn't fit in very well at school. Before I knew it, I was sent up to the primary school and put in what was called an opportunity class. There were about 4 Aboriginal kids, some children with Italian backgrounds and others who were Anglo-Australian. We were the slow learners, or the kids who had spent lots of time in hospitals. We were the ones who were seen to be left behind in our schooling. We were all called dummies, and from being in that room I was also called Blackie. I found it awful being called these names, but from the very beginning I knew that I was a lot luckier than some of these other children, and this knowledge was significant to me. By the time I was 13 I'd learned a lot of practical skills in that opportunity class. How to iron and sew. Whoa. But it got to the point where I knew school was doing me no good. At the age for leaving school, it was that time I was about 14, but if you found work you could leave school earlier. So at 13 I left school. Now I am welcoming you to this university. These days there are so many more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in universities, studying and teaching. This is something in which we are very proud. So welcome to Kaurna country. Thank you for coming And thank you for bringing your languages, your skills, and your stories. So welcome to Adelaide. Now I want to tell you what happened when I got my first job at 13. I went to work at a box factory. I had figured out if I had nothing up there in my head, as I've been told for many, many years, there at least was nothing wrong with my hands. Working on the machines in the factory was very fast work, and this was very good, and I was very good at it, and it brought a lot of pride. But there was something else that was very important to me. Most of the other workers in the box factory were Italian and Greek women. There were also other women from Europe who had suffered so much during the Second World War. I'll never forget their sad stories of the war. I heard women share with other women their stories of being raped and other events, and that they had survived. Some of these women were refugees. I recall one older Polish woman in particular who spoke to us about the bashings and the rapes. She found these stories hard to tell. They were very private stories, and we all found them hard to hear. But something about the telling and listening was significant to all of us. Her stories and those other women stayed with me. They are still with me today. It was a powerful learning for me as a young woman to understand these other women's stories. In Australia, while I was growing up, there was a lot of racism in many different forms. Hearing the stories from these women, what they had survived and how, helped me in some way to deal with all that was happening around me. These women also introduced me to a love of stories. As we grow up, we all listen to other people's stories. We all listen to other people's stories of their journeys. I think listening to these stories make us who we are. The stories of these women didn't lessen the injustices I was facing, but it broadened my life. And there was something else. Those Greek, Italian and Polish women welcomed me as a young Aboriginal girl to that factory. They acknowledged that Aboriginal people were the first people of this land. They had a lot of respect for Aboriginal people. They acknowledged that we were the rightful people of this country. This meant a lot to me as a 13-year-old. It made me feel as if I was not alone. That's what welcoming can do. That's what acknowledging country can do. And this brings me to the talk that we're going to have and to hear this morning, stories from the refugees and ways of working with refugees. These days we hear such negative things about refugees and asylum seekers, but we do not hear their stories. These people are so in need. What would an Aboriginal welcome look like for them? These refugee women from Europe welcomed me as a 13-year-old girl in the factory here in Adelaide. Now I wish I could welcome these people there on Christmas Island. Let's face it, Australia is big enough for people who need to be here. So now let us hear the stories from...
Australia's stories of welcome for people seeking asylum are mostly constructed and voiced in the media and political arena, proclaiming many other agendas and ideas rather than warmth and welcome. In these dominant discourses, many voices are missing or silenced, and we do not hear other stories of welcome. I'd like to share with you some different types of stories today. Stories from people seeking asylum who have found unique outcomes from engaging with narrative ideas amidst the turbulent journey of seeking safety and belonging. The people whose stories I share with you today have given their permission. However, they have requested that I change their names, as many are still within their journey of seeking asylum in Australia's detention network. When I met with an Iranian man, whom I'll call Mehdi, he conveyed a strong desire to speak the details of his torture. We spent a considerable amount of time discussing how this telling might occur, what would be needed, and what roles we might play. Together, we developed a plan of multiple storytelling, where Mehdi gave me permission to interrupt and slow down his telling by asking questions that would assist developing storylines that could run alongside that of the torture story as platforms of safety and alternative identity. Mehdi and I were both surprised at the richness and difference of the stories that arose from the telling of the main story of torture. Mehdi spoke of a memory he had during the torture, where he had begun to chant the words from political protest songs. Mehdi recalled the sense of power he felt upon realising that he could still take action, still stay connected to his beliefs, that he could act in refusal, in defiance of the torture inflicted upon him. This rich development of an alternative self, a self capable of taking action in even the most desperate of situations, became a very important story to Mehdi. It became a source of sustenance and self-knowledge that would play a part in Mehdi's ongoing journey of seeking asylum in Australia. A 22-year-old Afghan man, whom I'll call Abbas, taught me a lot about the gentle perseverance required to co-research alternative stories. When I met with Abbas for our one and only session, I was struck by the strong presence of helplessness and hopelessness. It seemed that these two were working together to paralyse and silence Abbas. As Abbas spoke, it was like it was taking a great deal of effort and energy to impart his words. However, he persevered and shared with me the effects of hopelessness and helplessness and their long histories in his life. It seemed hopelessness and helplessness were working very effectively together to thwart any invitations I put forward in search of experiences of self. As this dynamic continued through the conversation, I had the strong sense that helplessness and hopelessness were consolidating their dominance, and Abbas was shrugging his shoulders. I told you what they're like. But still, I remained unconvinced of their totality, their domination, and I worked hard to shake the shadow of doubt cast by these two very devious characters. I racked my brain trying to think of the knowledges and skills shared by other Afghan men of connecting to alternative stories of identity. My mind travelled over landscapes and through seasons, and then maybe, possibly. So I said to Abbas, Abbas, this may sound like a really strange question, and you've been ever so patient with me, asking so many questions today. Could I ask you, if you were an animal, what animal would you be? Abbas's response was quick: a bird. Abbas described a black and white bird that was a common sight where he was from. I asked if he knew any stories about birds that he might be able to share with me. After thinking for some time, Abbas shared a particular saying: even if you take the sky away, the bird will keep flying towards freedom. Well, I'm not sure what hopelessness and helplessness thought about this development, but suddenly they weren't so central to the conversation. A thin but meaningful alternative story had begun to emerge as Abbas shared that he'd always been resolved to keep trying in life, that this was the one thing that he holds precious and that sustains him through difficult times. At that moment, Abbas, the interpreter, and myself shared a sigh of relief, a sense that the hard work had started to shine the light through hopelessness and helplessness' firm grasp and illuminated some possible alternatives. People have shared with me how important finding ways of making home in the heart is. This idea of re-establishing people, places, stories, rituals, and other significant memories within the heart in transportable, nomadic ways hold particular meaning and strength for those travelling on the journey of seeking asylum. A man who I met with on a number of occasions, an Afghan man whom I will call Mohammed. Mohammed had been on Christmas Island over 18 months and expressed feeling at a loss as to how to respond to the overwhelming effects of long-term detention laid upon a history of torture and trauma. Mohammed connected strongly with remembering conversations, drawing on his memories of the countryside of his childhood, the daily rituals and tasks around the farm and house, the stories his parents used to tell him, the seasons, the rhythms of the animals, and the preparation of particular foods. We noticed together that during these conversations, Mohammed's body would begin to relax, a sensation and experience that had escaped him for many months. Mohammed would remark on feeling sleepy at the end of a conversation, perhaps an indication of deep relaxation, which had evaded him in his prolonged experience of sleeplessness. Mohammed's experience highlighted to me that alongside reconnecting with identity and self, narrative conversations have the potential to facilitate relaxation, a whole body-mind experience. So as a way of ending, for now, it seems to be a good time to talk about rethinking the end. And by this I mean attending to goodbyes all the time. In uncertainty and unpredictability and not knowing, greetings and farewells are significant, and careful consideration can lead to some lovely and unique outcomes. I'm continually surprised at how conversations about endings at the beginning rouse clarity and purposefulness in therapeutic conversations. I witness people accepting the invitation with a focused resolve and becoming precise in articulating what they hope to speak about, what is most important for them in that moment. When I met with Ali for the first time, a 16-year-old young man who travelled by himself from Afghanistan, he had thanked me with a very solemn politeness for making the time to meet with him, but he wasn't sure that he wanted to speak with me. Of course that was okay, I replied. Was he able to share what was his main concern about speaking with me, just in case there might be some way we could respond to this? Ali replied simply that anyone that he becomes close to disappears. I inquired further about the effects of people disappearing from Ali's life, and he shared with me the most challenging aspect was the not knowing, the not saying goodbye. I thought about this and asked Ali if it would be okay if I could share with him the things that I did know and the things that I didn't know about counselling on Christmas Island. Ali wasn't sure that that was going to be particularly helpful, but he was very generous and gave me the benefit of the doubt. I spoke about the uncertainty and unpredictability that I had noticed in my work and shared with Ali some of the ideas I'd been trying out in response. I spoke about this idea I had of perhaps attending to goodbyes all the time, and at this point Ali interrupted me. So we could pretend that this is the only time we meet, and I could talk about whatever I wanted to, and we wouldn't need to be sad because we know that we're not going to meet again. I said, well, if we did that, would that make anything possible for you? And yes was the enthusiastic response, and off we went, guided by what was most important for Ali in those moments. I hope for Ali he had experienced an alternative ending to the dominant story of people disappearing, one where he had been in control of, he had choice about, he had been able to prepare and plan for. Guided by Ali, we had the opportunity to work for another 3 months together. And in those 3 months, our work stayed centred around attending to goodbyes every time. Thank you.